Dinos Ioannidis, who is a management consultant and founder of Adaptable Management Consulting, and who has managed several crises both in the IT and transport industries, including Bob scares, PR issues, the economic downturn, operational disruptions due to forces, nature or human actions, and so on. Stefanos Markou is a management consultant for Nova Roberta and director of Dolor Locus. In his role as a management consultant, he has advised enterprises across different industries on strategy and operations, rapid recovery and transformation, with the most recent example a leading European HR and payroll services provider on managing the different possible scenarios of the COVID-19 crisis, as well as the impact in their investments and transformation initiatives. And now the session starts. Dino, Stefanos, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Panayotis. Okay, when a crisis hits, suddenly everybody remembers that they should have had some sort of response plan in place. And we see a lot of people, they start talking about putting together a crisis response team. Who should be on it, what sort of level of authority they should have, what their roles are. We see a lot of this in the media, a lot of posts going around. We start talking about how we handle communication, how we handle PR, external communication, internal communication, incident action planning, and so on and so forth. And don't get me wrong, all these elements are extremely important. And during a crisis, you need to take an hour-by-hour, day-by-day approach, monitoring everything. But as standalone items or bullet points on a memo, they're just not enough, because for a crisis management or response plan to be worth the time we spend on building it, it should be tied into a company's day-to-day activities. It should be embedded in the mindset of all the people working in the company. It should be part of the company's strategic and financial planning. It should be budgeted for. Otherwise, it's simply a set of guidelines that we pull out when the crisis hits, and we hope it works. So we should, in essence, be looking more at building an adaptive and resilient operation rather than crafting a pop-up crisis management plan that we sort of activate as soon as something happens. So in order for this to be feasible, we should be looking at creating a culture that seeks constructive change. If your people are not geared in their everyday work life at seeking constructive change, at making improvements, in accepting change easily, chances are that when their operational model has been turned upside down and inside out, you're not going to get them to change that easily. And in order to have this, people need to be trained, people need to be coached in order to respond professionally to adversity. And I've worked with companies as a manager where, because of the culture, because of lack of development of the people or whatever, I knew that if something went wrong, I would have to step in and micromanage. And I've worked for companies where, again, because of the culture and because of investing time in people and developing them properly, I was confident that when something goes wrong, people know how to respond, at least in the initial phases. And it's also very important to build an efficient, modular, and self-reliant operation. The more efficient we are, the easier it is to adapt to changes. The more modular our operating units are, and if you'd like to take a look at the higher model, that's the people that make the air conditioners, the lower our risk is, because it becomes dispersed. And obviously, the more self-reliant we are, the less vulnerable we are to disruptions in our supply chain. And obviously, something that we should be doing anyway, we should be generating data that allows us to monitor our core processes. Numbers don't lie, so we should be looking at the right numbers. That's one of the most important things. So trying to manage a crisis emotionally is not the best way to go about it. I'm not saying do it inhumanly, but just not emotionally. So practically speaking, we need to ascertain the mindsets and behaviors. We need to go and take a serious look at what's going on in the company with our people. And there are any number of tools and methods to do this. We can use focus groups, one-on-one interviews, engagement surveys. There's a lot of ways to do this. But we need to know where our people are. We need to know levels of commitment. In times of crisis, we need to know the breaking points. the risks associated with these, what opportunities we have, and so on and so forth. We need to rethink how we recruit, motivate, and develop our people. And this is something that is core to the success of great organizations. And it needs to be tackled from a holistic perspective, which is the perspective of our employee journey. And we should be reassessing the effectiveness of our processes, which is sometimes difficult to do in the good times, not only in times of crisis. And this is what we refer to usually as continuous improvement and operational excellence. And these are nice terms that we use in good times, but it's no longer a fancy sort of paragraph on a website. We need to be able to execute in the best possible fashion. And we need to be rethinking what our numbers are telling us. I mean, companies generate tons of reports. We need to take a very hard look at how we interpret our data, because I mean, the data is usually there. Are we using some sort of scorecard? Are our dashboards correctly set up and calibrated? Would you get into your car in the morning and drive off to work if you couldn't see if you had petrol in the car, if the engine was overheating, and how fast you were driving? I mean, this is what the dashboard is all about.
So why are we saying accelerant perspective? So obviously a crisis is not something that is desirable. However, it can be seen as a catalyst of change in a few circumstances. So meaning that a few of the things that we wanted to change all along, the crisis itself can give you the opportunity to change things easier. That's what I'm referring to as a catalyst. But there are a few things that we need to have in mind, and we need to assess the situation first. So how do we appreciate the crisis? So it will feel to everyone that it's a situation that no one knows what to do, especially initially. And I think we have experienced that during the corona crisis. And I'm quite sure that even now, we don't completely appreciate what is really happening to us. So obviously, we're talking about unprecedented situations. So if we had to think of how people feel, from employees to management to our clients, they will all feel like it's very chaotic and unsettling. They will feel like it's a situation that we don't know what to do now, we don't know what to expect later, and so forth. So indeed, we are called to handle unprecedented situations. So we need to tackle unchallenged assumptions. What do I mean by that? When we build our business model, when we define our revenue channels, our distribution channels, and so forth, we make some assumptions. And in a period where we don't have this crisis, this urgency, those assumptions are very solid, they're very rigid. During crisis, we understand that some of those assumptions are not true. So to give you an example, let's say I made the assumption that I'll always get my merchandise here because there is a flight from India to Qatar, and then from Qatar to Europe, and so forth. That might be not true. So as a result, I don't have the purchase the goods at any given point in a specific, at a point in time, let's say. So that's precisely why we need to start tackling the unchallenged assumptions. We need to understand what really we thought that it would never go wrong, but it will go wrong because of the crisis. So this is why we say that there is a crisis can be a chain reaction, like a domino, and crisis is systemic. So therefore, the solution needs also to be systemic. So in the same way that when you have an emergency of, let's say a doctor has an emergency, and the doctor tries to understand the symptoms of the patient. In this situation, in the crisis situation, we manage the symptoms, not the root cause. That might sound like an oxymoron, but during crisis, this is precisely what we need to do. And of course, we need to understand the symptoms because, again, we have to reflect back on those rigid assumptions that are not true anymore. So just to summarize then, all this situation during crisis will feel like no one knows what to do. It will definitely feel chaotic from employees to management to the organization. We will need to tackle our unchallenged assumptions, and we need to manage the symptom, not the cause. So therefore, what do we need to do? As Dinos has mentioned, we need to have an audit and understanding of how people feel and think currently of this situation, appreciate also the corporate culture to see whether that existing culture can accommodate this situation. As I mentioned earlier, challenge our key assumptions. And as Dinos mentioned earlier, we need to create data to extract data in order to understand what's happening. So in that case, we need to build control mechanisms. Once we do that, then we have to use that data that we get. And that's why we need to move into real-time problem solving. And therefore, we manage systematically and thinking and acting systematically. So some of you might have heard the definition of a war room, let's say. So even in crisis, you can treat this as a project. So when you have a project or a program, you set up your so-called war room. And the reason that they use the war and the battles analogy because it will feel like a battle. Well, in crisis, that is even more amplified. So it will not feel like a traditional project war room. So you need to break it into phases. So the first phase is to protect your assets. And what are the assets of the organization? The assets are your employees, they're your clients, and your financial health. So you need to make sure that you take care of the safety of people, your own people, your employees, that you make sure that about the well-being of your clients. In fact, this is an opportunity because if the client understands that during the crisis you have put a lot of focus, that can amplify the feedback on the relationship you have with the customer. The customer will never forget how you managed them or how you helped them or didn't help them during this crisis. So once you protect your sources, then you can start thinking of what opportunities you have during this crisis. So as we spoke before, the accelerant perspective. In order to do that, just like in a battle, you have to recover. And the secret here is that you have to recover fast. Obviously, you have competition out there as well. And the speed of recovery is one of your competitive advantages that you have against the competition. So in order to do that, what do you do to recover fast? You need to, as we said earlier, to understand where people are from, let's say, a cultural perspective, but how resilient is your business model? And therefore, to have the right insights to move into prepare mode, where you make sure that you have the right corporate culture, that you have the right business model which is resilient to change, and so forth. Once you establish that, then in order to capitalize, you need to monitor your performance. But you need to monitor your performance much more frequently than you used to do before, because you are in an unmapped territory. A lot of the new initiatives, you don't know what the real impact will be. So therefore, you need to monitor performance and work in an agile way where you can have something like a minimum valuable product, get the feedback back, develop it, and move on. Or just say, I failed fast, and therefore I need to redesign my business model. After that, you need to capitalize. So in this kind of situation, for instance, we can see that out of a lot of changes, we might need to focus on new offerings, for instance. Or it might be that because of changes in the competition, if we play our cards right, we can get a bigger market share. Or we might need to review our distribution channels. I think that's one of the elements that people are looking right now in crisis. What we need to differentiate here, though, is that just because the right distribution channels worked during the crisis, that doesn't mean that it will be permanent forever. So to give you an example, Ocado, for instance, that is a service in the UK where you can order your online shopping from supermarkets, from Waitrose, for instance. During the crisis, obviously they have seen volumes on business going up, and that, of course, it's easy to explain. So therefore, because they had that business model in place, they were able to add value to their business, and their valuations skyrocketed. That doesn't mean that they can maintain the market share they got. It might be that for some people, they retain the same way of doing business with, so following the e-commerce avenue. But it might mean that people, after the crisis, some of them actually were fed up to do the online shopping, and they go at the other extreme, then they always go and visit the premises. Or it might be that they decide to say, we do it monthly on this case, like the big shopping we do monthly online, but then actually the daily one we do physically at the supermarket. So therefore, we need to appreciate and understand where the real opportunities are going forwards, not looking backwards. And that's how we capitalize. Something that you need to have in mind is that you take the customer to the journey from the beginning. So we mentioned that the customer at the beginning, when you talk about product, you have to maintain the well-being of the customer. And that's where you can engage the customer early on. Once you do that, then you are able to get the right insights from the customer, the right feedback on the things you are implementing and so forth, and manage the relationship more successfully, get the real engagement from the customer. So let's see one example of how an organization has gone through these 4 phases. So one of my last engagement was for a leading European payroll service provider. So they had already in place a lot of initiatives for change, operational transformation, M&A activities, a lot of investment going on resources, on capital, and so forth. So given this situation, what they decided to do is they decided to understand, okay, where are we now, but where will we be in the future as well? So what they have done is they have built a few scenarios around it, as you can see from the slide there. And they have split those scenarios into quarters in the year. So let's start from Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. They built 2 main scenarios, which is the one scenario meaning that we're going through this crisis, but we will go through it within, let's say, the next 3-4 months, and then we'll have a very fast restart of the economy. The other scenario was exactly the opposite, so that we'll have some delays, we'll not be able to restart the economy quite fast. And within that scenario, they also did 2 sub-scenarios, which is more like a light version of it and the heavy version of it. In that case, because what the payroll provider does has to do with, well, pay slips, essentially, they assess what will be the impact on employment and unemployment, on various types of employment. And that was giving them the insights about how their revenue will be impacted, for instance. So through this analysis, they were able to understand and make some predictions. That doesn't mean, though, that in the future they're not going to review, get data, validate their assumptions, and so forth.
Okay, in business, the basics will always be the basics. So, I mean, companies need to be profitable. They need to deliver quality to their customers, and they need to do this in a cost-efficient manner. And this is also one of the guiding principles of lean. So this doesn't change when a crisis hits. It becomes even more important, and we need to be remaining focused on our profit. And this is, we may think we are, this is where we start taking stock and brutally appraising our cost lines, taking a very sort of strict look at where we spend our money, what we're spending money on. And in some cases, it's not so clear because some things are close to home, they're made here. In my case, I had to close down offices that I had gone and opened, and they were my pet projects. But we need to realize that we're in survival mode. And in survival mode, luxury of any sort is a luxury that we can't afford. We need to be continuing to focus on delivering an excellent service. I'll give you a brief example. I ordered some Nespresso from the local distributor online, obviously. So it arrived, and one of the capsules was broken. So I sent them a picture and I said, "Thank you for the coffee. Unfortunately, one was damaged." I got a phone call shortly after that from a very polite lady saying, "Mr. Ioannidis, don't worry, we'll replace it this afternoon." I said, "You don't have to. I just gave you some feedback on the delivery process." She said, No, she wouldn't hear about it. So I got a phone call in the afternoon from someone, not from the courier, from the company, and he said, "Is it okay if I pass by in 15 minutes? Fine." Very polite, with his mask, with his gloves and everything. They replaced the product and gave me a complimentary limited edition set, which is what you expect from a good company. And customers remember what you do in times of crisis, and there is an opportunity here to enhance your image and to enhance your customer experience. The other thing we need to remain focused on is having efficient operations, which everyone says they do, but sometimes it's easier said than done. And there are so many managers that have little or no idea what goes on under the hood. So if we don't know very well how our operation works, then we don't know what resources we really need. We don't know what we can do without. We don't know what we can reallocate, and so on and so forth. And just note that for all of these, we rely on people. And I've worked as a manager and as a consultant with companies where the problem is the people at any level. So, I mean, maybe they haven't been selected properly, developed properly, motivated, or whatever. People are not our most important asset. The right people are our most important asset. And we need to bear in mind and remind ourselves always that we won't get the job right with the wrong people. And all of these fundamentals still hold true during a time of crisis. So in our effort to crisis-proof the organization, we need to use them as design parameters and not sort of work around them in times of crisis, hopefully then get back to business. And the more robust our operational models are, the more resilient we are. So how do we build this resilience into our everyday existence? I mean, we need to be identifying the hubs of our operations. These are the processes that drive our business. These are the processes that define how we make our money. So we've heard of profit drivers and KPIs that measure them. These are the processes that generate these KPIs. Then we need to go and identify the vulnerabilities in these processes and the possible points of failure. Having done this, we then go and we ascertain failure scenario. When would it be that these profit-driving processes may be rendered invalid or non-feasible? I'm sure you all remember the volcano eruption in 2010 in Iceland. I'm not even going to try and pronounce the name. It's up there for anyone who's interested. I was with DHL Express at the time, and DHL makes its money through air express transports. So the eruption rendered the profit-driving processes invalid because the aircraft couldn't fly. So there was a contingency plan to move to a road network, but there had to be a plan there in order for it to sort of happen overnight, which it did in essence. And this is what's happening with companies with the COVID-19 outbreak. So in order for business continuity management to work, it should incorporate elements of disaster recovery planning and crisis management, including how to respond to disruptions and maintain a backup capability and contingency for our operations. And we've come to rely on traditional risk management approaches. And in a globalized business environment, emergent risks are extremely hard to predict. Their origins often lie in events that may be very improbable and may have unclear effects, but that could nevertheless tear through any supply chain, and they can even be augmented by our responses to them. And if we go to look for the statistics, sometimes they're not available, they're not there. And a traditional risk manager might not really assign too much weight to highly improbable occurrences. So, I mean, Stefanos mentioned this before, we should be spending time on categorizing more the effects and not so much the causes. So not what if a specific volcano erupts, but what if I can't get my aircraft off the ground? Having done this, we can then expand outwards from this plan for these effects, and we can plan for varying scales and different localities. And we need to be asking ourselves, okay, what effects could disrupt our profit-driving processes? What if I don't have my raw materials in place? What if I lose X or Y resource? Or I have some disruption in the supply chain, and COVID-19 case, supply chains have been affected end to end. It's not just the supply end, it's also the end user, because not only because of restrictions in distribution channels and lack of access to them, but also because of a simultaneous negative impact on disposable income. So this brings us to the other contingency that we need to be planning for coming back from the crisis. How do we get back to selling as much as we can sell once we hit the market again, so that we can recover in an even more efficient manner? So how do we react if we're faced with these causes, with our profit making processes being rendered invalid? To answer this, we need to know our operation very well. In some cases, we don't. So if we know our operation well, then we know where to prioritize. We know our vitals. We know what to touch first. If you look at an ER doctor, if they bring in a multiple injury, they know what to stabilize first. And it's the same with any operation.
So as Dinos mentioned, we need to start again reviewing the process at our current state. So it will definitely feel like a restart. So essentially, it will feel like you're a startup again, even when you are an organization that has been there for years, that has grown and so forth. So in order to understand that, we can appreciate that one of the types of employees that are more able, by definition, to cope with the startup culture, let's say, house, are the younger talent management. And why is that? Because, for instance, we're discussing a lot about remote working, being very mobile, independent as well, and so forth. So the new generation is more able to adapt to these new habits of work. And they're also more happy to work like that because they want to focus more on being judged on the result, on the outcome, rather than the hours they spend or the meetings they participate and so forth. And actually, this kind of philosophy, this culture, the ways of working, is what it seems to be the way to move forward. So, because they want to do that, this group of employees, they want to think of smarter ways to do things. Because if you think of smarter ways to do things, then you can do exactly the same work, but not necessarily spending the same time. You can spend less time or you can focus more on the right things. And again, they want indicators that can reflect their productivity that are outcome-based, essentially. So in order to engage these employees, but also as part of role modeling, make the rest of the employees behave like that, you need to reward people on challenging the status quo. If we are to look at the processes again and again, as Dinos has mentioned, we start challenging everything, essentially. As we mentioned earlier, we challenge a lot of assumptions that we have made that we never thought that we revise them. So in order for that to happen, we need to reward people that are actually doing that. They're challenging the status quo. So all this, as we mentioned earlier, will feel like a startup philosophy, what we call entrepreneurship, when you have a large organization that promotes entrepreneurial spirit within the organization, we call it entrepreneurship. So as we said, it's where people are judged on results, they think of smarter ways, and they're also rewarded for that challenge they do. So I think Dinos mentioned earlier about the example of going into an A&E. You have an emergency of a patient, you're admitting it to an A&E. So indeed, during the crisis, that's the situation. Because you come with a lot of symptoms and you treat the symptoms. But as we said, you need to look in the future as well. So you have a one-off fix that is done to you, vs adopting new habits. Think of it like you have a patient that went through an operation. They have managed the symptoms, they have done the fixes there, but obviously that patient needs to adopt new healthy habits. An organization is the same. And management has a different role to play. They can move into more of a coaching role, given that we discussed earlier about autonomy, about people being judged on the outcome, having a look at their productivity, thinking of smarter ways and stuff like that. Management can act as a facilitator by coaching people rather than giving them strict directions about how to do things. And that can be in the form of daily huddles done remotely or physically, individual coaching as well to people and so forth. So again, younger generation will be more inclined to and more acceptable to this new way of doing things. That is more of a sustained effort with a bit of discipline as well as to how you do things.
Okay, many see crisis management about returning to where we were before. But things are never the same after a crisis, whether it causes ripple or avalanche effects. And if we look a bit at the stages of a crisis, and I'm not going to talk about the real first stage, which is predicting, foreseeing, and preparing for it before it hits, usually what happens is we get hit with the crisis, like we were now, and then we need to manage through the crisis as it plays out, which takes up a lot of resources and is very stressful, which means that a lot of people are not really thinking about what we do once we get back to some sort of normalcy. And in fact, the essence of dealing with disruption should be to view it as a learning opportunity. This should put in place long-term changes that will make us more resilient in the future. We've heard about disruptive innovation. What we're looking at here is innovation because of disruption, and the COVID-19 crisis presents exactly such an opportunity. Stefanos mentioned the accelerant effect. This crisis has already accelerated decision-making by breaking down the barriers of sacred cows, bureaucracy, even legislation, and good old-fashioned denial and resistance to change. So let's make sure we don't go back to where we were, but let's take advantage and become even more resilient in the future. This is a sudden and global crisis, so everybody around the world is trying to find new ways of doing things. And we have been forced to change our perspectives and the way we get things done, which, by the way, is not a bad thing. This is not a bad thing. We should be looking at this from the positive perspective, and it would in fact be criminal to waste this wake-up call. So if we look philosophically at it, one might say that the world is in turmoil at this point because of something that isn't even visible to the human eye. And the threat of a viral pandemic has always been present. I mean, specialists have been talking about it for decades. But it's in our nature to ignore what we fear and adopt the "it'll never happen to me" mindset. This is not a proficient way to plan for business. So we need to drop the "it's never going to happen to me" and start taking a more if-then look at our operations. And Stefanos talked about this. We need to question everything. We need to be questioning everything continually. And when is the time to reevaluate our operations and the way we do things? That time is always now.
So obviously, Dinos has spoken about that we need to change in this case. Again, though, even though the crisis can be a catalyst, that doesn't mean that all your roadblocks are away now. So rest assured that as any change, you will feel the resistance from somewhere. This is the definition of change. People do resist to change, circumstances, and so forth. So let's have a look about why does this thing happen. So we have discussed about the new ways of working. Let's call them smart working. We said that we're going to be outcome-based, that we're not going to be very rigid on the way we do things, that we can challenge the status quo and so forth. So any smart working scheme that you're introducing to an industry, a company, even at home, to be honest, will face considerable resistance. Rest sure about that. So traditionally, organizations have looked at dedication in a very different way. So we've spoken earlier about the new generation, and that's where perhaps there is a gap, because what in the old days organizations were translating as dedication might not be the thing that people recognize, like younger generations especially, about how they demonstrate their dedication. And also it might not be what we need for the future as well. So there is indeed a tendency, and there has been until now, of considering a successful organization being one that has a lot of employees, a lot of locations, a lot of sites as well. Massive buildings is something that traditionally we have learned to interpret as a measure of success for the organization. So in fact, that's where the crisis now might be a catalyst for change. So for instance, if you're always considering, if for you, it was never a case of I have this fancy massive building, for instance, and that is an element of success, but I want to work smarter and have a mobile workforce and be agile and be able to be in different geographies. So let's forget about the restrictions now that we have. In the future, obviously, perhaps the next year, if it's not this year, we will be able to travel. But that can be an opportunity to be more flexible, to adapt to these situations. So it will definitely be hard to convince people that if they were used to translating a successful organization using that old model, now you can suggest to them that if you have small mobile teams, for instance, they can still be doing exactly the same work as the old model, or even better. Or you don't need all these fancy buildings and you can reduce your cost base, or even though you will need the physical space, you can be smarter about working in collaboration with teams and being physically somewhere with your clients and so forth. So it is, people will consider this new ways of doing things, these smart working schemes, as we said, as a direct threat to the status quo. So that's why we need to be very clear about why are we doing this? So what results do we want to achieve? And if we're very clear about that, we need to be very clear about the metrics to measure the impact we have so that we can show to people, this is why we're doing it. And actually, when we start implementing it, this is indeed the benefit it has to what we expected. Yeah. So just to summarize then, we have spoken that through this change, indeed, we will face considerable resistance, that we need to redefine what is perceived as dedication to the company, that indeed it will be seen as direct threat to some people, the status quo and so forth, or even their position. And thus we need to be very clear about why we're doing it and being able to demonstrate with metrics why we are successful. So that takes us to how we manage change. So we can see a model where what things do we need to have in place to have a successful change. So as we mentioned earlier, we need to understand the why, but we also need to explain the why. So it's for management to be able to be very transparent and explain why we're doing this change. Once we achieve that, then it's for management to do their own modeling. If management doesn't follow at the first instance those new ways of doing things, being mobile, show themselves autonomy, appreciate autonomy, be based on the outcome, then you're not going to convince the rest of the employees to follow that. And also, you're not going to convince your clients about the new way you would like your relationship to go in the future. So if you do establish their own modeling, then what you need to make sure is if your people understand, if your people see you doing it, then they should be able to do it as well. So in order for this to happen, they need to have the skills and the knowledge for that, but also the infrastructure. So this is why management needs to make sure that people are supported to build the skills required, but also have the tools to implement it. And finally, the last piece of the puzzle is, as we mentioned earlier, if people have understood the why, they have understood, they have seen you doing it, and you have given them the right equipment and the skills to do it, then they need to see as fast as possible the results. You also need to see the impact so that you can redesign if something goes wrong as well. So we use the analogy of a puzzle because if you have all these four pieces blending together, then you're talking about a successful change. So just to leave you with something as we're approaching the end of this presentation, that's a quote from the author from The Little Prince. And it speaks about if you want to build a ship, don't drive up the people, be focused a lot on the process and so forth. Sell them the vision first. Give them autonomy, but teach them about the endless journey. Make sure you are transparent that the reasons for our journey are these. That is going to be a long journey, but there is a benefit out of it.
It's not so much anymore about telling people exactly every step what to do. It's about getting people excited about the end result. Thank you for bearing with us. It's been a pleasure sharing our experiences with you. So I think we're now going into the Q&A period.
Yes, if we have any questions. You can send your questions via the chat box.
Thank you. If there's anything you feel that you would like to take offline, please address it in an email and we will get back to you.
All right, let's leave. We have a question.
Can you scroll down, Marinus? We're not seeing the...
We cannot see the questions, actually. Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay. To what extent?
Okay, natural selection, the Darwin Effect. Okay, non-efficient companies, I mean, in Cyprus we had, and I mean, we've just started coming out of the economic crisis. In 2013, we had a haircut where it was called a bail-in, and a lot of the companies lost all their money and their funds, etc. But yes, it is a fact that some companies, non-efficient companies, companies that can't continue to deliver a service, will have a survival problem. To what extent this will depend greatly, I think, and this is contextual because I really don't have the numbers to answer this, but this will depend greatly on how extended this lockdown period is. Because I mean, we can take a couple of months of isolation, we can possibly foot the bill for the cost of running a business, and again, depending on the size and the depth of the pockets of each organization. Very hard to say, but yes, some companies, smaller companies that have liquidity issues that are not able to continue to provide their service and get paid for it. Because that's another issue, because some companies are still providing a service, but some customers are not, in fact, paying for them. So yes, I mean, there will be a number of companies that will be wiped out by this. And this is where people start looking to governments, to governing bodies, to regulatory bodies to actually band together and see that this is minimized, because it is a global crisis. And I mean, there are the mechanisms to soften the blow.
It might sound a bit cynical, but indeed, because that will be the case for many industries, this is where some of the organizations might see that as an opportunity, meaning that for some organizations, it might be that you have a chance to get a bigger market share, because survival of the fittest, not everyone has survived, or it opens new opportunities to move to new markets and so forth. So indeed, you'll have some examples where it will feel like that. Obviously, various countries have put some safety nets. We don't know how effective those will be, but yeah, it will feel a bit like survival of the fittest, yeah.
You want to take the next one?
So the next one, how do you think the financial sector will be affected worldwide?
Some more questions there?
No, I think those were the ones below that, yeah. Yeah. So, financial sector. So, obviously, there is a lot of complications into this. Given that the financial sector is linked with companies, the products they offer, they need also to go through a review and understand what is the new landscape, what kind of products they need to offer to their clients as well, because it might not be the same as well.
And don't forget that the system has been shocked. So I mean, in order to start defining long-term results, the system needs to come to some semblance of stability, because we've had a shock to the system, and we've seen markets reacting in very predictable but short-term ways. And this, I mean, like I said, it needs time to play out, and a lot will depend on the extent in terms of time, depth of time of the crisis and the lockdown. Okay, a traditional company. I'm going to assume that we're talking about a traditional company, in some cases maybe even a family business. It doesn't, okay, from no time at all to 6 months to never, because it all depends on the mindset at the top. If we have leadership and management that is embracing the way to go agile and smart, and by the way, managing through the crisis, if you have an agile way of doing this, it helps a lot, because we're dealing on different things changing every day. So like I said, we need to be monitoring, and Stefanos mentioned this, all the factors of our business on a daily business, being on top of developments. So if we have the tendency to accept change, and I mentioned this at the beginning of the talk, it shouldn't be too difficult to move to agile, but you need to, like I said, in some cases, in all cases, it's up to the people. So if the people at the top are willing and able, if you like, because there's two things, it shouldn't take too much time. And going back to the survival of the fittest and the natural selection, a lot of companies in coming up to this crisis have actually learned how to cope, and they've actually woken up very quickly, and they have come. But how long it would take depends on the people you have at the top, and then the people you have populating your organization. So if I'm willing to take a very sort of professional look at my people and sit face to face with them and face the hard facts and touch upon the sensitive subjects, and we're not attacking people on a personal basis. This needs to be kept at a very professional feedback level. Look, this is what we expect of you. This is going well. This is not going well. This is what has happened. This has been the effect. This is the way we need to go about it. And I'm going to go and quote a bit of a cliche. In some cases, if you want to make an omelette, you're going to have to break some eggs. If the people at the top do not want to go agile and work into the sort of smart business and adopt a management model that will, in fact, free up all the talent that's out there with the millennials and the people that are used to and very accustomed to working from a cafeteria somewhere or from home or from their tablets or whatever. If we can't see this, then the answer is never.
And we spoke about agile models. So yes, you can expect from the operations to be agile. But in the same sense, we spoke earlier about role modeling. Therefore, you need also to move into that phase as well as top management. Something that has been discussed before actually the crisis, and that's why maybe the crisis can be a catalyst for this, is that move from a strategic planning process, like the traditional strategic planning process that you define every 3 and 5 years and so forth, to more of a strategic thinking. So a continuous thinking. That way, you have something that is aligned to, you cannot be expecting your operations to be agile when you're very rigid into your direction, let's say. So your top management also needs to be to adapt into this model.
The next question about the local market, this is Cyprus, I'm assuming. I'm seeing a Greek name, then maybe from Greece. Will the local market fill the gap of the tourist income? This is one of those cases where we've been talking about it for all these years about how we need to change. This is not my area of expertise. So again, this is my opinion. It's not my expert advice. So we can, and again, depending on how long this thing lasts, we can do things if we're willing to change models and being able to, because we're looking, first of all, we're looking at a shift in the season. Okay, it's no longer the 3 high months that we have in the summer season. We're looking at pushing this towards the end and further on. And we have been talking in Cyprus, at least for many years, about how we need to have all the year-round tourism, how we need to have themed tourism and health tourism, and all these other things that that would possibly be more lucrative than the traditional what we're getting in the summer. But this means reviewing the infrastructure, and we've spoken about this. You need to have the infrastructure. We're not set up. Some cities may be. Most cities that are hub spots in tourist season, they're ghost towns in the winter. So you need to have the proper infrastructure in place. Can we make quick changes? I believe we always can, if we can, and we've seen this. We've seen state agencies working in a much more flexible manner than they have in the years that have gone by.
And for that particular example, think of it. One of the root causes that we haven't managed to get tourism out of the summer period might be that people were very comfortable with that, because whoever was involved in the tourist industry, well, the majority, not everyone, saw that just by focusing on the summer season and perhaps a bit of spring as well, with the midterm in the UK and so forth, you can still get your business very successful. Then you don't have a reason to change. Now that you have a burning platform, that's more likely to accelerate the things you are planning to do, again, for this example. So going to the next question.
Okay. One question is the sectors that we see as being the winners going forward, which again...
that can be temporary as well, but indeed the obvious one would just say, okay, so supermarkets, I guess. But then beyond that, you may argue that during the crisis, companies that have been doing games, for instance, or Netflix, very popular, but that doesn't mean that they continue to be so. So, for instance, Netflix, I've seen numbers that they have increased their users. That doesn't, and some of them might decide to stop it, some of them decide to continue with it. So I don't think it's still clear about who's going to be the winner in the long term.
I'm not trying to avoid the question, but as I said before, there are still a lot of unknowns in the equation. And I would say if you want an answer to that, who will be the winners going forward? The winners going forward are the companies that are already looking to capitalize, as Stefanos mentioned, on whatever it is that we can do. I mean, obviously, yeah, supermarkets ride the wave, but don't base your long-term growth on what you're looking at today because the numbers are wrong. Transportation companies, okay, things are they're coming to a standstill, and obviously there will possibly be explosive growth in some areas once we start having the measures being lifted. But again, I think that the sectors and the companies that will be the winners going forward are the ones that are doing their scenario planning, taking a very strict sort of timeline, and coming back to the previous question on how long we can survive in terms of financially speaking, and sort of setting themselves with strict timelines as to what their reactions will be depending on which scenario plays out.
I'll give you another example. The pharmaceutical industry, a lot of people believe that they are the big winners in this case, right? We don't know yet, though, the other parameters. So we don't understand how the governments will come and regulate the pharmaceutical companies. Because the model of the large pharmaceutical companies is that they invest a lot of money on research and development, and then with a patent, with a long-year patent, they make money because they put a premium price into it. If for this specific instance, various governments and regulatory bodies come and put pressure on the profit margin, then all that money they're investing right now in research and development might not give them the profitability. They might give them the revenue, they might give them the volume of sales, but that doesn't mean that it gives them the right profit as well. So again, it's
is there another one in the list?
Yeah, sorry. FinTech Company. GCC launch?
Not sure what we mean by can't get new business. So the question we're looking at is, as a startup FinTech company, which already is impacted in this crisis in the GCC region, how can we survive, and how can't we get new business? Do we have some feedback on this question? I mean, I can take a try at answering this if I understand it correctly. It's similar for it doesn't really matter if you're a FinTech company or the other kind of company you are. But okay, startups, obviously you're facing challenges. I mean, I don't know what stage you're in your business, but it's all about, in a time of crisis, it's about trimming sales, getting into survival mode, as we mentioned before, having no luxuries, maintaining an excellent service, and riding out the crisis so that we can get back. But we need to be planning, and we need to be monitoring, yes, as we can't get new business. So this is what I said before. You need to be looking at your sales contingencies. What could I diversify? How can I differentiate in whatever it is I'm selling? Are there opportunities to be made? Even if this is a sort of short term, and ride the wave, which the wave may be longer than we think, and actually stay alive during this crisis, again, depending on the size of the operation. And then you need to be monitoring and looking at what's going on in your industry, in your sector, so that once we can get new business, if you like, we're actually targeting the right business. And this is, again, in times of crisis, you need to be taking a serious look at your customer base. So this is a very loyal customer. He's been our customer for years. They've been credible so far. Are they credible? Do we still extend credit? Do we actually cut them off? Are we being unethical if we cut off a customer who's been with us for years? But we're in survival mode, so we need to be looking at what can help us survive.
If you can't get new business, but you still might have some assets. So the assets might be the clients you have already approached, or you can do cross-selling with a new offering. And again, you need to review. You need to break into phases. So it might be that you focus on something different for a short period. So if you define that this is not going to be extended in the long term, you might decide that I keep my customer base by offering them something different. I understand their new need for the short term. I keep them happy because of that flexibility of mine, and therefore I'm able then to keep them for the future when I can go back to the old offering, let's say. That might not change its value in the future term. Yeah. I think.
Okay, there's no more questions. There's no more questions in the
Yeah.
list. I mean, we have a couple of minutes left. If anybody else wants to ask something, otherwise, I mean, please feel free. I mean, we'll stay on for the duration until 5 o'clock.
All right. If we don't have any questions, we okay. If we don't have any questions,
We're happy to take
all right.
anything offline. I mean, contact InfoCredit and we'll get back to you. We will get back.
Correct. All right. Thank you, Dinos and Stefanos and Dinos, for the very interesting information you have provided to us today. Dear participants, we have now come to an end of this presentation. The video of the session will soon be publicly available on the FinTech Group website and on our company's social media channels. A certificate of attendance will be sent to your email address. We hope we have met your expectations and that you have found this webinar interesting. Please take some time to provide us with feedback about today's session on the survey link that is on the chat box and also will be sent to you by email. Stay tuned for more webinars by following our website. Thank you once again and have a nice rest of the day. Keep yourself safe and healthy.